Hey guys, this is vman from No Budget Productions on the Pizza Roll Diaries, and with me today is one of my favorite fan film guys, Aaron. Is it Vanderkley or Vanderkley?
Vanderkley.
Vanderkley. Okay, well I've been mispronouncing it. I'm terrible with names, and I always say that because I mispronounced my own name if it wasn't mine. So Matt, welcome to the channel. You and I have we always run in the same groups, but we never quite
Yeah,
connect.
we've
Um,
orbited each other.
yes, exactly. So you've been doing fan films now for a few years. What has it been? 5, 6? How many years has it been now?
I think we released the first one in 2016, I
Wow.
think.
Okay, so it's been about 5. Wow. And that one was
That
Line of
was the
Duty,
needs of the many.
Needs of the Many. Okay. Um. So you've been a Trek fan for what was your first Trek series? If you don't, let's delve into that. What was your first Trek series
Sure.
that kind of got you hooked?
So it was Voyager. So my dad is a massive Star Trek fan, and uh, in Australia, Voyager was given the sort of death slot. So my dad used to put a VHS tape in and tape it at midnight, and then we'd
Mhm.
watch it the next day. But yeah, my earliest memory of Voyager is the Killing Game Part 2,
Ah.
which we had. I still have it on cassette somewhere. Um, but yeah, I used to watch that over and over again, and I had no idea about Part 1 until probably the DVD came out.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so that was my first exposure to Star Trek, and I loved Voyager. I loved the family aspect of it. One side of my family is Italian, so it's sort of a big family is a big thing, and so I recognize that in Voyager. And I also recognize the sort of strong female role model in that. My mum is like Captain Janeway. So yeah, they're sort of two things that resonated with me, and it's still my favorite series. And so doing this sort of second run of short films in that Voyager era has been really cool.
So Voyager gravitated more toward what you picked up on with Star Trek. What was some of the other what was some of your favorite episodes with Voyager once you kind of watched the entire thing? What were some of your favorite Voyager moments or Voyager episodes?
Um, Definitely the Killing Game.
Mhm.
Um, I often found that I liked Star Trek episodes that took Star Trek outside its own context. So I think that's why I enjoyed Killing Game, because it was Star Trek, but it wasn't really Star Trek in that they were in World War II on the holodeck. They were playing different characters. Um, what else did I like? Deadlock is a good episode. I'm actually in the middle of
Mm.
a rewatch of Voyager now. But yeah, Deadlock is a good episode. That was a great bottle show. Um, I think it's interesting that you don't need to go off the ship, or you don't need a larger budget to tell a pretty simple story. So that was a good one as well. Trying to think. I
Well,
think there's definitely a tonal shift in Voyager from about season 4, halfway through season 4 onwards, and I think they sort of
right.
understood that storytelling was changing, and the fact that the writers gravitated towards Seven of Nine as a character more, and sort of forgot about the rest. I guess really showed that character arc that perhaps the other characters were missing from the start, but with Seven they could tell it pretty much almost as soon as she got there. Um, but yeah, Voyager was the Voyager was the
Well, there,
one for me.
there was definitely when Kess left, and they kind of gravitated, with Seven of Nine character and going forward. The first couple episodes of season 4, when you still see the Borg, stuff on the outside of the ship. They're kind of prying the stuff off. That right there kind of told you everything you needed to know, as this was a new era of Voyager. Um, I think some of the moments that still kind of make me tear up even now. My wife loves Voyager. I think that's her favorite series. For mine, it's DS9 for the type of storytelling that they told. Continuity serialized type. But for Voyager, um, it's my least favorite, I think, of all the series is, just because at the time I, you know, I saw so much potential of, man, this could be serialized like DS9. It should be that way. Um, but even at the time, moments like when the Doctor comes back from the Alpha Quadrant when he was on the Prometheus, and he had that. It was that episode with Andy Dick, when
Yeah.
they're fighting the Romulans, and he comes back and he tells Janeway, he's like, "Hey, Starfleet wants you to know we're not alone." Like even moments like that, like I got goosebumps because I was like, dude, that matters, like that has a huge impact on everything else, and when they finally make contact with Starfleet, and they, Tom, the Admiral Paris, says, "Hey, tell my son Tom, I miss him," or something to that effect, like that right there, it was like that gets you choked up because it's like that's a true family moment, like that's progression of characters, and it was stuff like that you talk about the family aspect of the show. It's like, for me, I wish we had more of that, because it's like when the characters worked, they really, really worked, like the friendship between Harry and Tom. That was some of the best stuff that we had in all the show. Like you felt the camaraderie, you felt the family, you know, um, the relationship between the Doctor and Seven of Nine was some of the best. Like when they're singing, and I think it's "You Are My Sunshine" that they're singing together, and
Yeah.
that's the moment we realize that the
Another
Doctor.
good episode. Yeah.
Oh yes. Oh, it's such a good episode. You know, um, but that's the moment like you realize like he's, as he's looking at her, like you see the love in his eyes, and it's stuff like that where it's so subtle, and it's just like, oh, tell her, damn it, tell her you love her, But it was such a good show, because it was those character moments. But it's funny that you mentioned that they kind of had a shift in tone, and you could tell kind of uh, the stories, the kind of bottle type stories with the ship and everything. Um, because it's kind of reflective in your storytelling. As you and I were talking before the show, I kind of did a binge watch of all of your episodes, or all your films. And that's the one thing that I really appreciate about your films is it doesn't try to go like it doesn't try to go grand scope. Like you're not in 15 different locations and everything. Like you very much have a very small, um, somewhat claustrophobic type vibe, for lack of better word, but a very modest type feel, but very appropriate for the stories that you're telling, which are very character based. And it to me, I feel like it's very appropriate that Voyager's your favorite, because I can see that influence on your storytelling, um, because you don't use huge sets or 20 different settings, but you do use that kind of enclosed setting. Um, what can you tell me about your thought process of when you start thinking of films? Because you do a huge with not a lot. Is that accurate description of your filmmaking?
Yeah. I think there's sort of two parts to that. One, I know it's a short film, and I think that you can cram as much as you want into it, but at the end of the day, you've only got a certain amount of time to tell a story. And when you're writing a script, if you can't go from top to bottom and work out the point of this page, then like it's just, you might as well scrap it and start again, or say it in one line, because you've only got a certain amount of time to get what you want to get across. Um, and the same with the setting for it, like Needs of the Many has two sets, and they're very small sets. And the purpose of the story is the sort of circumstance that those people are in, and the fact that one person has to make a sacrifice in order to save the greater whole. Um, and there was sort of no point making that any bigger. Um, so I think understanding that you have a short amount of time. It's a short film, so you don't need 50 million settings, and you don't need 50 million characters. And also, it's easier to shoot. Really, like Needs of the Many was shot across 2 days, not even full days. So yeah, you sort of have to work out what you've got and make the make a good story out of that. But the second part of that is when I was at university, I did a lot of university theatre, and one of the guys that was directing and writing shows always did this thing which I noticed of. He would set plays in, like, one of them was post-apocalyptic Australian outback, and it revolved around four characters in an undisclosed location. You know, we had this massive world where the world had ended and what happened to civilization, and yet it took place in a very sort of narrow space with
Hmm.
four characters, and we never explored what actually happened, but
Hmm.
how what happened affected them and how they
Right.
affected each other. And the more plays I did with this guy, the more I realized that, you know, he would have these massive settings, you know, this hospital, and it would be set on in one room, or, you know, a cafe at the end of the world, and it would be set just in the cafe. And I think he sort of painted this bigger picture, um, but you only saw a very small part of it. And I think that's what I tried to do in this, that, you know, we can have the Romulans attacking Starbase One, but the purpose of the story is that there are three characters that are trying to stop a war. How do they do that? So I think
Right.
that's the approach that I've taken.
Well, when you get down to the was it Derelict? Yeah, it was Derelict. The vibe of that film that I got, it was very much like the film Alien. Um, when like the whole point, because I mean, when you go to the film Alien, that very much is a horror film. Your mind fills in the gaps. When you get to the film Aliens, that's very much an action film. Like they're two very different genres of the same franchise, you know. And I mean, when you look at them from a filmmaking perspective, they're not, you know, they're not the same type of genre. They're two different approaches to the franchise. You know, because aliens are they're guns ablazing and you see 50 million aliens and they're, you know, all over the, but when you go to the film Alien, you don't see much of anything there, and it's the approach, and it's your mind fills in the gap. And so I mean you'll see a little bit here, you see a little bit here, you see a little, and that's the thing that I love about your approach to at least that film. Like you're filling in the gaps yourself. You're hearing this, you're seeing that, you got a glimpse here, but you don't need to see all of this other stuff, you know. And I think that's where a lot of other films fail. They'll have, you know, poorly rendered CGI because they have to see the starship. They have to see this over here, and you're like, nope, screw that. It's kind of like, I don't know if you ever watch wrestling, but it's I was a big fan of ECW back in the early '90s, and ECW is like, we don't have the lights and the pyro and all this, but you know, accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, and that's kind of what you do. You're like, hey, we've got this, and that's all the story needs. It's not even go there and do that, you know, if we don't need it. And when you go back to Needs of the Many, um, you didn't even see CGI in that one, if I remember correctly. You just had, like you said, the two sets, and you know, I don't remember, I don't recall what starship it was because that wasn't important to the story. What was important was you guys have this critical situation, and they're gonna die. You know, to me, it didn't even matter, and that's how invested in the characters I was. When the lady stands up and he's like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "Yep." He's like, "Are you lying?" She's like, "Yep." You know, it's like, "Oh no, don't die." You know, like you're so invested. You know, and that's your, you know, again, like we were talking before the show, we have how many Star Trek episodes where they don't have that emotional connection that you've established in, you know, less than 10 minutes, you know. um, to me that's just genius writing, you know.
Thank
Do
you.
you a two-part question here, and forgive me if I'm fanboying out because I am a huge fan. um, uh, do you write the stories yourself, and two, where do you come up with the ideas for what you write?
So I do write them all myself. I think number three from the first sort of run of stories, Good Men, I co-wrote with my partner at the time. Um, but otherwise, yeah, I write them all myself. In terms of ideas, for Needs of the Many, I was doing a radio play at a theatre show, and it was War of the Worlds actually, and I think I was on the stage and I didn't have anything to do, and I sort of picked up a piece of paper and I started writing out ideas for this story, which ended up being Needs of the Many. But the idea was that it was sort of like a 911 call, and I'd been reading a lot about 9/11 and the sort of relationships that form between the 911 operator and the victim, I suppose. Um, and those types of connections that they had at a time of disaster. And that's where I sort of got the inspiration for this story. Um, that it wasn't about what was going on wider. It was about these two people connecting on a human level um, in a horrific incident. And so, and the fact that they're relying on each other's voice, like they can't see each other. Um, and, you know, having those moments, like you were saying before, about when she stands up and she's in pain and he can sense through her voice that something's wrong. And she says, no, it's okay. And he says, I can tell you're lying. And that's where that story evolved from. And it wasn't supposed to be a Star Trek story. I just happened to have a few set pieces from something that I was going to do many years before and never did anything about it, and thought I could probably turn this into a Star Trek story. Because I'm sure if you took out the Star Trek little bits of techno babble and the setting, that could be a story for anything. Like it could fit any situation. And with something like The Derelict, that originally was supposed to be just a pirate story that was about this sort of pirate queen that, while they were pillaging a ship, discovered this sort of maniac in the hull that this crew was transporting, and she sort of met her match essentially, and it didn't end well for this pirate queen. And again, that's just turned into a Star Trek story. And it's funny that you mentioned the horror aspect of The Derelict, because originally I wrote it as like a horror film, and there were sort of gratuitous violence bits, you know, where there'd be I think they were going to come over with a security officer, and we'd see his head stuck on a pipe at some point in the film, and that would be very shocking to the main character. But as I sort of got more and more into it, it sort of became like I was writing for horror rather than writing for Star Trek, and it wasn't a Star Trek story. It was just a horror story.
Right.
And it was just, like I said, violence or blood for the sake of, or gore for the sake of it.
Right.
And so yeah, so that evolved through like a couple of drafts before I got to the sort of Star Trek version that I wanted. I think Good Men, which doesn't really have it's not Starfleet focused, was me trying to say, hey, Star Trek doesn't need to be about Starfleet. It can be about the other people in the universe. You know, it's a massive universe. It doesn't have to be about them. And the fact that that story sort of paints Starfleet as the villain, really, or not in a great light.
Not so good guys, right?
Yeah, we see two sides to this. We see two sides of Starfleet. How does everyone else perceive Starfleet? And it's interesting that is prevalent. It's certainly prevalent in Deep Space Nine. That there's a dark side of Starfleet that people don't talk about, but it never was brought enough to the forefront that I think that, and it sort of I think displays how the producers of those shows are sort of tiptoeing around the network. And the network knew what it wanted, but perhaps that the writers had a bigger vision, but the network, we don't want to paint Star Trek in a villain. People want to just watch this and watch an episode and then go away and doesn't continue, and things like that.
Right.
So it was trying to explore different things that perhaps at that time they would have been like, oh, we don't really want to paint Starfleet in a bad light,
Right. The only time they really could ever get away with that was the mirror universe, so they could step outside of But as for being a realistic organization that sometimes goes into those shades of gray, yeah, no, I think you did it really well for the story that you told, and the story really stood on its own for uh, going down for these people looking for that inspiration of their own, and even himself then at the end going, I want to talk. It was like, him finding himself again, and those people getting their faith. It really did feel like DS9, like a DS9 story, in every way of the word. I thought the guy was Bajoran because I mean the earring kind of was reminiscent of that.
Well, he
Um,
was supposed to be Bajoran, and then the day of the shooting, the person that was doing the makeup pulled out.
ah,
Um, so we were like, oh well, let's say he's disguised, or he's on the run, so he can dress how he wants and
right.
whatever. But the intention was that he was supposed to be Bajoran. So yeah, and the fact that that was sort of the Enterprise era, and Starfleet didn't really, well, as far as we're aware, sort of know about the Bajorans at that point.
Well, I think anytime not Starfleet, I think anytime Star Trek. I mean, in a perfect world, I know Gene Roddenberry always wanted, you go back to Star Trek the Motion Picture or Star Trek the Next Generation Season 1. It always portrays Starfleet as this utopia organization. Realistically, I don't think humans will ever be, no matter how far in the future we go, I don't think we'll ever attain that. We're fallible creatures. We're just not that. Um, and I think, we're always going to be more of we're going to veer toward, you know, not Star Trek the motion picture, but more Star Trek to the Wrath of Khan. We're not going to be Star Trek Next Generation season 1. We're going to be more Star Trek, Next Generation season 3 or 4. It's going to be something a little bit more, uh, a little more evened out. But I think episodes of like DS9, uh, I forget. It's the episode where Garrick and Cisco are kind of working to bring the Romulans into the war,
Yep.
and Cisco goes to Garrick and is like, "Look, what do we need to do this? I can't get my hands dirty, but help me." And Garrick goes to some pretty dark lengths, and he even goes through Cisco to get the approval of some things. Um, but it really paints Starfleet in that light of what do you do? Because we're on the losing end of that war. And how far would you go to win it? Because I mean we're the good guys, but sometimes that means you have to go to some pretty dark lengths. And I think that really, when you have to self evaluate and look at yourself, those are always the best stories because we all want to be the Superman. We all want to be the truth, justice, and you know, um, but we can't always do that. It doesn't always pan out. Like what would you do in an apocalyptic type world or scenario? Sometimes you have to do those questionable things. And I felt the film, um, uh, Good Men. I felt that really, um, for all of those characters there, it really did kind of, here's the other side of the coin. The Starfleet isn't the noble people per se. You know, Zam here says Garrett gets some of that blue gunk on his hands and he starts killing people. No, he really does. And those are sadly that's who Cisco has to align with, and Starfleet, to win the war. Because if it wasn't for that, would we have won the Dominion War? And those are the things I used to think about in high school. That's why DS9 was my favorite series, because I'd sit there and be like, you know, uh, and those are the stories that shaped me as a filmmaker. I love thinking of those things.
And I think that's what I was talking about before, with the fact that the DS9 writers in particular, they were ahead of the curve, I think, in storytelling. Well, we know now that they were ahead of the
Yeah,
curve, but
yeah,
the network and perhaps the producers really didn't believe that that's the way that television was going. And I feel like, with no disrespect to Gene Roddenberry, I think the storytelling of the 60s evolved fairly quickly by the time the Next Generation came around. And, people looked, especially post-war, people looked at television and theater and movies for escapism. They didn't want to see the real world represented on TV. They wanted to take a load off and not have to think. They wanted to see a positive future, which in the original series in context makes complete sense, right?
Right.
But when we got to something like uh, the Next Generation, that first season and the second season as well, it's just, if you analyze it, it is essentially 60s Star Trek presented in beige
Right.
in
Right.
the 80s, right? The way the episodes start off right in the middle of the action, and with the narration as to what's going on, and it's very 60s. And then I think the sort of the same with the first season of Voyager. It's very Next Generation, just stainless steel, and it's that, I guess, fear from a network or the producers that we have to make this like the other show, and then it found its feet. And with Deep Space Nine, it's and they go through it in the documentary. It's storytelling's different. People want to see character growth. They want to see conflict. A perfect world is boring from a storytelling perspective, and so to have characters that are supposed to be perfect and get their hands dirty to bring a whole race into the war so that they
Yeah.
have support, like that's interesting. It's dynamic storytelling. It's like interpersonal conflict. That's what
Well,
we watch.
I would say I would say with DS9, one of the reasons why that was one of the reasons why that had such a huge impact on me as a Trek fan was they had so many secondary characters. I mean, take Nog for instance. I would argue he had more character development in DS9 than say Geordi on Next Generation or Counselor Troy.
Yeah,
If not to offend any Geordi LaForge fans, take Counselor Troy. I mean, she really didn't have much character growth in Next Gen. Um, but take Nog, and he had so much more character growth in those 7 seasons. Um, and he was only a supporting character. And that's the type of storytelling that I love, is when you can latch onto the secondary characters and you feel like they're just as vital as the main ones, because that feels like real world to me. Because in real life, there are no secondary characters. Because like you and I were talking about earlier, we run with the same people, but there are no secondary characters. They're just people who we know, and they know, and they know, and we run with the same crowd, but we've never actually spoken. Um, and that's kind of like DS9. They all know of each other, but they may have never interacted, and that's real life. So to me, DS9 always felt the most realistic. And it was 10 years before uh, the remake of Battlestar Galactica, which to me I think is like that's my favorite sci-fi series out there. I think that's leaps and bounds ahead for so much more character development than any series out there in terms of what they've done. Um, I mean, and that's the norm today of what we get with all the streaming services and everything. It's
yeah,
so, we have so much more out there that we can binge watch, and it's made for that format of, every episode depends on what came before. There's not episodic stuff now. Yeah, Frank says Gene wasn't great in character development. Um, I I think Gene was more of an idea man more than a character development guy. Like he had a lot of great ideas on the crew for classic Star Trek, and even for like Next Gen. I mean, came up with Data, you know, came up with the blind helmsman, with Geordi. Um, I think he was more of an idea guy, um, not necessarily execution of what do you do then. So he was good for a starting point, but then what do you do? Um, so, uh, what do you think? Would you agree with that, Aaron? Or
yeah. I would say so. I was just thinking about, what we were talking about with Voyager at the start, and the fact that, we had these sort of two crews coming together, and one of them was sort of a band of rebels and they weren't trained, and the other one was perfect. And when they came together, we had one episode that was about that conflict, that people didn't fit in. And if it was a serialized show, that whole first season
Yeah,
would have
we
been
would have got
about,
more. Yeah,
yeah. And with Seven of Nine, again, like we were saying before, those first couple of episodes that Seven of Nine joined the crew, she became a background character. She wasn't very prominent in the first, after she was, returned to be human. It was a very quick transition. There was no lasting effects there. But then, halfway through that season, or towards the end of that season, they were like, oh, hang on a minute, this might have been a bit more traumatic. And then they've gone backtracked, and she's really
regressed.
struggling. Yeah,
Right,
and she's
right.
struggling to be friends, and really struggling with humanity. And that's what
Yeah,
they explore. But we just missed that.
yeah. So Zam says did not see enough of the rebellious side of the Maquis on Voyager, in my opinion. No, and I agree with that. I think if it was done today, and this was my problem with Voyager when I first started watching it, um, and why I kind of phased out around season two, or midway season two. I picked up again when the Borg first showed up, that very first episode, called, I think it was Collective or Co. It was the one where Chakotay's on
Yeah,
that planet with the new cooperative.
yeah,
Because I was like, dude, the Borg, I gotta watch it. But that I would have had them actually be kind of rebellious and kind of get out of control until the Borg show up, and then be like,
yeah,
okay, we got to get, you know, we got to get our poop in a group, because man, if not, we're going to get assimilated. Have that be the reason why they have to, force together. Because no offense to the Kazon, they were weak sauce. That hair, I don't know what was up with that. That was just, what is that? But I love the idea of the Vidians. I love the Hirogen, species 8472. I felt Voyager. I felt the Maquis was like, that storyline could have been so much, and that could have created the inner conflict. I felt that the Borg was overutilized. Like, have that be the catalyst to make everybody come together, and then have species 8472 and the Hirogen be the main bad guys, because the Hirogen had those communication arrays that were all over the quadrant, so they're scattered. Have that be a way that Voyager can jump from point to point to point to get home closer. Like, to me, I just felt like, stay away from the Borg. That's next gen. The Dominion is DS9. Like, establish your own stuff, like what you were trying to do. And have that be the Hirogen and uh, the species 8472, have those be the reason why we need 7 of 9, and why we came together with Maquis. Like, I just felt like the series lacked direction in that regard, that a serialized thing could have really benefited from. But I really feel like the Maquis really could have, the rebellion stuff was a lot more interesting, and it kind of fell flat there. Like, the best thing, like, my favorite first officer is still Chakotay. Like, when he tells, in the second episode, when B'Elanna had hit Carrie, and the two Maquis members walk up to Chakotay, and they're like, if you want to take over the ship, we're with you. He's like, if I hear you talk like that again, I'll personally throw you in the brig for mutiny. And they both just look there stunned. I'm like, where's that Chakotay? Like, we
yeah.
lost, like, I loved that, because I think Robert Beltran's a great actor, but I felt like they just underutilized him. But it really was a show that it had a lot of heart to it. But what could have been.
Yeah, and if you read like the series Bible, one of the notes that they make in it is that the first season will have episodes about the conflict between the Maquis and Starfleet. I think it's even in one of the books as well, when they interview for that first season, and they're like, yeah, this is so much potential, and it's just not utilized. And even the breakdowns of the characters, like Chakotay, they're so focused on this whole idea that he's a North American Indian
Yeah.
that they forget that he's a person as well. Like it's
Yeah.
just every episode, especially in sort of season 2, it has to be about,
Yeah.
you know, he's on this spirit quest, and
Yeah.
then he finds this Kazon kid, and he has to, you know, steer him. And the same with his dad when, you know, he finds his tattoo or whatever painted in the sand. It's always about him being spiritual, and we have
Yeah.
that pan flute music, but it's never about him as a person. You know, it's just his identity is his ethnicity.
Yeah. It's like they were trying too much to be, you know, relevant, you know, in that regard. And it's like, well, but he's a person first that just happens to be, you know, yeah. And that they dropped the ball in that regard. Yeah. Because I thought he started off really strong, and then, you know, it's sad how it turned out, because I really felt like they dropped the ball there, you know. But one of the things that I had a question about your films, because again, going about character, um, how do you get your characters to feel so real when you write? Because I know for me, when I write something, I base them on people I know. So I think, okay, if you know, character A is talking to character B, I'm going to base character A on, you know, Johnny at work, and I'm going to base character B on so and so from, you know, my old Bible study back in the day. And those two characters are going to interact because I think they'd interact well together. And that's, you know, I speak with their, you know, I put the inflections there, and then that's how do you do it? Because they feel so real. And again, we spend less than 10 minutes with most of these characters.
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think that's just how I write. I certainly don't base it on any particular person or anything like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I just write, and that kind of happens, which is lucky. But yeah, I'm not sure. Not quite sure the answer to that question.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you have you most of your films have taken place in the Enterprise era. Was that an intentional thing to stick to that era? Because most fan films are TOS era. Yours were mostly Enterprise era. Was that something that you wanted to stick with, an era that most people haven't, or, you know, unexplored, or was that something that was a cost effective thing for you to do, or?
It's definitely not cost effective. Um, I think the reason why most people go for the sort of TOS era is like it's their Star Trek, and you know, I think that era is very well represented in like prop making and things like that. But also in terms of sets, I don't want to be uh, eliminate the hard work that goes into people's set building and stuff like that. But I think the TOS sets are a lot simpler. There's plain like straight lines. Like
Yeah.
there's a reason why it was made the way it was, and it was
Right.
for cost, right? Whereas like something like the Next Generation era, there's a lot of curves, so it's a more complicated set design. But with Enterprise, the Enterprise sets, the Enterprise sets are beautiful sets. The production design of Enterprise is extremely elaborate. And so making like wall flats, it wasn't just like in the original series where it's just a flat wall and a plant on. The Enterprise ones have a lot of texture to them, and depth, and there's certain elements that go together to make up individual rooms and wall pieces and things like that. So it was certainly more complicated to build. But it's just because there's a lot of TOS sort of fan films, and I wanted to do something that was a different era. My dad loves Enterprise, and he watches Enterprise to death. In fact, in our house, Enterprise never went off the air. He watches it every week. And I just wanted to try and make some more episodes for him, really. So that's why I chose the Enterprise era. But I always Needs of the Many was just going to be a standalone story, and then when I saw it got a good reaction, I decided to make it another 4, and so that was a series of 5. And then the plan was always to move on and do a different era of Star Trek. So that's what we've been doing now with Beyond the Sun, that came out earlier in the year, Outbreak, which is number 2, which was supposed to come out October, but we had to push back just because we're just waiting on visual effects stuff. So that will hopefully come out at the start of next year, and then the third film, which I still have to produce. So that was all in Voyage era, and then once those 3 are done, we'll move on to something else.
So do you have your costume? Do you buy your costumes, or are they custom made, or how are those done? Because
so the costumes we bought online, and then they're altered by my mother, who is a very talented seamstress. But yeah, so they're all sort of bought costumes. However, so for example, with the Voyager costumes, you can buy the jumpsuit, but you can't buy the shirt that goes underneath. And well, you can buy it, but it's not accurate.
right.
And so we had to try and make these shirts. And we have a discount shop here called like Best and Less, which I think would be the equivalent of like Lowe's.
Mhm.
And they happened to have a T-shirt that was about the right color. And when you put it under different lights, because the Voyager T-shirts, sometimes they're gray, sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're purple,
Yeah.
depending on the light conditions. And we found a T-shirt that mimicked that. So we bought up a shop of these shirts, and a T-shirt has a neckline here, but the turtleneck comes up here. So my mum had to sort of unpick all these shirts and recreate these shirts. So that was a lot of effort for what is essentially a shirt.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, so there's elements that you can buy and sort of make do with, and then there's elements that you really have to just do from scratch. And the other thing, which sort of comes up a lot in fan films, and it does come up in sort of the comments on mine, is that you're not a production house. The real Star Trek, they tailor make costumes for their actors. The actors come in and they do a fitting, and it doesn't fit. They come back and they remake the garment and they put it back on. That doesn't happen it doesn't happen in my films. We have a read through date where we try on the costumes, and then the next rehearsal is usually the one before we start filming, and whatever alterations need to be made for that garment happen, and that's how it goes. So I think sometimes people in all fan films are quite sort of unrealistic in their expectations, and that it's a fan film, it's not a Hollywood production. We don't make the
Right.
clothes. That's the way it is. Sure, we'd love to tailor make each piece of each uniform. People come in all different shapes and sizes.
Right.
Star Trek actors, they get told, go to the gym before we start filming. We will pay for your gym membership for the rest of the show because you need to look a certain way. People in the future look a certain way. They're
Right.
muscular. They're a size 8, and whatever. Whereas that's not how fan films work, and that's not how the real world works, unfortunately.
No,
So
sadly, some of us look like the fruit of the loom fruits, and that's sometimes you get the apple, and that's about it. That's yeah. No, I get it. Sometimes you get the sizes. What I do, I get the largest size I can, and then you snip and clip, and that's about it. Because I have a seamstress that I go to on occasion where if I need something specifically made, she'll make it for me. But realistically, I don't have someone to trim or tailor anything. And that's realistically, that's just for my type of production. I can't do that. And like you're saying, in a perfect world, we all could do that, and we all could be hitting that gym membership just like good old Tom Paris and Harry Kim. We can't do that. I work 70 hours a week. There's no way I'd be able to go do that. We're kind of stuck with what we can, and we do this out of passion. It's not none of us really get paid to do what we do. We just do it. Um, but I love the fact that you guys were able to find material for the Voyager shirts. I know for the ones that I've bought, I had a few that were donated that were the light. They were the light gray ones, and then the ones I bought were like a dark purple. So it's for me. I nitpick uniforms because I love uniforms. I love seeing whatever they have. out there, I don't mind the variations. But for me, when I have two people standing next to each other, one's in like a light gray turtleneck, the other one's in a purple, I'm like, oh, I cringe myself because, and these are in my films where I'm like, oh, damn it. Um, but sometimes you're stuck with what you got. But I think that's awesome that you guys found something to mimic that. Um, do you know why that material does that? Like, how come? Because that to me was always so weird that it did that. And I heard that DS9's blue shirt that sometimes it did the same type of thing, like it was the dye or something that did that too. Do you know anything about that or?
I'm not too certain. I'm fairly certain that the actual color of it is like a lilac, but it's just the way it is lit that it sometimes looks like gray, and it sometimes looks like a sort of blue color. So yeah, but the shirts that we ended up getting, they're of sort of blue grade, but again, under sort of different certain lighting conditions, it looks different. So yeah, but it's quite a stretchy material, whereas the ones that we have are just a t-shirt material, so they have to be like hook and clasp at the back, because
Yeah,
you wouldn't be able to slide it over your head,
right,
but you need it to be tight. How they make costumes is very interesting.
right,
And how they
right.
make Star Trek costumes in particular, the way that we can't see any sort of zips or seam lines or things like that is fascinating. Because I had someone actually did a lot of research onto this shirt, and it was a whole analysis, 100-page document that we went through, and they screen capped every episode, every shirt, the way the collar, how big the collar is compared to some episodes, and the amount of variation in it. It's amazing that people don't nitpick that in the actual show, because the inconsistencies, even episode to episode, about how thick the collar is and how it fixes up at the back, and how some people have their uniform like Tuvok pinned up right to the yoke, but some people have it down here. And if I was really harsh, if Voyager was a YouTube show, I would be like, hang on a minute, take it to town. But it's just fascinating, and it really highlights the fact that, hey, this is kind of a bit similar to what we were doing. Sometimes they don't always match. Sometimes they don't put the right amount of pips on the shoulder
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So
Oh, I was fascinated with on the TOS uniforms how they have the zipper like right here when I first got mine, how it zips up here and then unzip, it ends right here on the shirt, but you can just that's how you get in there, and you can keep your hair nice and everything. Well, I mean, when I had hair, or what little hair I had, and then you zipped right up here, and everything was good to go. And I was like, oh, that's genius. Like, who thinks of
yeah,
that? But I
and it
don't.
even follows. I think it follows the seam of the shirt, because it's like a raglan sleeve type thing. So yeah, the zip is like
Yeah.
hidden away in the. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
clever.
but at the time, like that was stuff. I mean, I think in terms like that now, but I mean at the time I didn't. It's just like the first time I went on set, like I was so blown away by being immersed in the TOS bridge. I saw it like, oh my God, I felt like I could fly off the planet right now. But now every time I go on set, the first thing I look at is, okay, we got to dust that, we got to go repaint that, we got to I nitpick everything because that's just the mindset that I'm in. And that's it really shows the filmmaker side. So going back to the filmmaker side, forgive me, I feel like I'm going off rabbit trail stuff just
That's
talking.
okay.
um, so do you have your own specific studio stuff, or do you do this stuff like for me, I film my stuff in my house. Do you like how do you do your stuff? Like say you're starting from scratch, you're like, okay, I'm doing a set, I'm doing a shoot this weekend. What do you do starting from ground zero? What do you do?
So that was pretty much what we did with Beyond the Sun. When we finished up on the Enterprise stuff, all those sets were totaled basically, and we had to start again from scratch. So it's just going out and buying some wood and building a set. And then the studio space that I use is my mum and dad's sort of garage, just a double car traditional garage, and we somehow somehow managed to squeeze in one set in that space, and then we'll shoot for that day, and then either turn it around for the next day on Sunday, or wait till the following weekend and rebuild a new set. We try to be quite clever with the set pieces that we build, and it worked especially well with Enterprise, because Enterprise set, there's a lot of reoccurring wall panels and lighting boxes and pillars and things like that, so it's very interchangeable, so you can make a new set from the existing pieces, and that's
Really?
kind of, yeah.
It doesn't look like I mean that's really interesting. I wouldn't gather that by looking, because whenever I watch a film, and especially yours, because I'm a huge fan of just the background sets and everything. Because whenever I watch a film, I look and I try to find inspiration on, oh, I can recreate something like that, or I can tear that apart and recreate. And that's kind of what I did with the background here with my stuff. I whenever I visit something or I watch something, I'm like, I can reinterpret that. And but I'm always like, I was always impressed with what you did in the background, and I have no idea how you do any of that. And I everything just looks like it's an original piece. I would never believe that you could just kind of take and pick apart. And that mine are very simple. Like you said, TOS stuff is very, you paint it, just put a plant on. With your stuff, it doesn't look like that. But that's kind of the case, huh?
Yeah, well, I think also the benefit was that most of the films I did, the Enterprise ones, always have a corridor. So when you build all the corridor elements, the different corridor elements, whether it be just a plain wall, so the Enterprise one is like broken up into I think 12 little sort of small panels, and then it's got a light grid across it. And then there's obviously a door. Sometimes you have a double door. Sometimes the door opens on the left. Sometimes the door opens on the right. In the shuttle bay, there's sort of this, I call it the paint tray wall, because it looks like 4 paint trays upside down, stuck on the wall. So we had something like that. There's a busy box wall that's kind of like on the bridge of Enterprise at the back, where the sort of situation room is. If we put like a panel over that, that can be a brand new wall. What else? Enterprise had like a sort of computer terminal type thing, which sort of indented in the wall, and had sort of lockers on either side, and then the monitor in the middle. There's all sorts of those things that when you put them in different combinations, especially for a corridor, you can make it look like a different part of the ship or a different set. A lot of the Enterprise stuff is, yeah, just reconfiguring those shapes and making a new room. When we did Line of Duty, one of the sets that we shot in, on one side was the captain's ready room, and the other side was someone's quarters, and it wasn't. We just moved out the bed and replaced it with a desk, but it still has the same basic layout. There's still a window and a plain wall and a door and a wall and a wall. So it's roughly the same. But with Voyager, it's slightly different. There's not a lot of reoccurring elements. Voyager's actually a lot, especially in the like quarters and things like that. A lot of it's just a window and a plain wall and a sort of decorative piece, a fruit bowl stuck on the wall. But yeah, but Voyager also has like curves and things like that. So the window, which we use for Beyond the Sun in the conference room, it seems to be a simple curve, but it's actually quite a complicated curve to make and try to match the angles roughly that was like in the show, and get the feel, and again find paint that mimics. Oddly, the paint also in the corridors is like it looks purple, it comes up grey, and sometimes blue. So I'm trying to actually at the moment match a mist tint purple paint so I can build more corridor sets, and yeah, it's purple, but it comes out grey. It's very odd.
Huh. So you have, right now you're in the kind of Voyager-esque type era that you're filming in.
Yeah.
What, and you've got another, you say you're in the middle of production of one, finishing up, and then you're going to do one more, and then you're on to a new era, you say.
Yeah.
What era do you think you're going to be tiptoeing in next?
So before I started Voyager, I wanted to do it's essentially like phase two. I wanted to do a show that was like, what if Star Trek had a TV series in the 70s? What would that look like? So I went and bought a whole bunch of 70s sci-fi shows. Um, and the sort of main inspiration actually is Space 1999, which is a British um, sci-fi show from the creators of like Thunderbirds and UFO. And yeah, essentially sort of really trying to recreate that look, that production design, costume design, the way it's shot, um, and yeah, do something a little bit different. And I guess sort of make my own era of Star Trek. I don't really care whether it's canon or not, but I enjoy set building, I enjoy the production design aspect of it, and so to design something from scratch, um, that's exciting to me, and I think that's where I would like to go. So I actually wrote the first episode a year ago while we were in lockdown. And I would have done that, but I was just a bit too scared that I would do it and people wouldn't respond to it. You know, it wasn't proper Star Trek or it wasn't an established era of Star Trek. So I went to Voyager instead. But now I would like to do that little 3 episode 70s Star Trek series.
Well, I think at this point, you I think at this point you've built up at least a fan base of your own that people, they'd be willing one to give it a shot, good or bad, they tune in to be like, what do you do next, but the wonderful thing about fan films is, that's those are the things that, you know like none of us are absolutely canon. I mean, we're canon to ourselves, because I mean, obviously, when I see your stuff, I'm like, man, I want to reference that, or I'll see something by Jose Sempita, I'll be like, I want to reference that, or I want to invite that guy in, or we'll do crossovers galore, you know. Hold on, I had a phone call. Go through. We always want to reference each other because we're playing in our own sandboxes, and we always try to include each other and whatnot. But the wonderful thing about fan films is we get to add on to a legacy that, inspired us to do something. I think at this point, man, I think we'd all love to watch it because to me, it's like, man, that just sounds fun. you know, Even if some people hate it, man, I think the people who would love it would far outweigh them. So, I think I speak for everybody when we're like, yay, give us more. That just sounds awesome. Sounds
Thanks.
great.
I
I
appreciate
can't
that.
wait to I can't wait to see it, man. It just sounds awesome. So, um, but anyway, with that in mind, when should we expect the one you're working on now? When should we expect that up and going?
So Outbreak, hopefully it's all been shot. I'm just sort of fixing up a few sound design things. It's got original score. For the first time, we've got an original score, which is very exciting. And yeah, we're just waiting on working with Sam to do the visual effects. So once that is done, hopefully the start of next year we can release it. And then I'm just working on the third one at the moment. We started building sets for that over the weekend. So we're trying to build a Jeffries tube junction box and the Jeffries tube to go with our corridor set. So it's exciting. It's a new sort of set and it's challenging and it's really cool. So hopefully once that's all cast and everything, we'll hopefully have that middle of next year out.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Well, Frank Parker in the chat, he wrote this while we were still talking about the 70s Star Trek one you were talking about. He says, no, go for it. So you got
Thanks,
Frank
Frank.
Parker's blessing. So
Excellent. No, I'm
so
glad that you guys think that because yeah, I like I said, I especially a year ago I was really concerned that if I did it, people wouldn't like it, but I don't care anymore. So
there you go, man. Be a trendsetter. That's it, man. That's the way to be. So All right. Well, with that in mind, we've come upon our hour mark. I want to say first off, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of your films. I love what you do with so very little. It's inspiring to people like me to see that, and you know, it's I think that it does what the short treks did. I'm a very big fan of that. I think those are better than the actual series that they put out, honestly. Um,
I reckon
and
they ripped me off, to be honest. I reckon Short Trek was
yeah, they really do. Um, you know, you know, you do a great job with what you do, and you know, I can't wait to see what you have. So, you know, hopefully we get more people on board to watch what you do. I can't wait to see what you have, and you know, just know that every time you put out a new film, you know, you got fans watching you over on this side, and you know, we'll keep pushing you out, man. As many times as you put films out, we'll be watching. So
Thank you so much, Vince. Thank you for being a real champion. It's
absolutely.
greatly appreciated.
Absolutely, my friend. So, with everybody in the chat, I want to thank you guys for joining us and everybody watching this on the rewind. I will be putting Aaron's YouTube channel in the description. So, go click on that description and subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. I can't imagine why you wouldn't, but if you haven't, go click that subscribe button and watch a video. Hit the thumbs up, show some support. I can tell you personally, subscribing to a channel and hitting the thumbs up button uh, means more than, you know, $20 or $1,000 or $1,000,000. Like, showing support, especially when an artist is discouraged, goes a long way. So go over, subscribe, watch a video, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment if you can, but support in any way that you can his channel. So I will put that description in, or I will put his YouTube channel in the description. So go subscribe. And with that being said, everybody, be genuine, be safe, and keep on geeking on, guys.